Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are ready to explore the Metaverse. In this session, we'll cut through the buzz to discuss concrete opportunities for early adopters as well as the young veterans of the Metaverse. I hand over the microphone to our moderator, Tyler Pathe, journalist, the Fintech Times. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the Innovate stage, the most exciting stage at the summit. We're here today to talk about online trading in the Metaverse. Is it keeping up? Is it doing well? Or is it falling behind? These are all questions we'll seek to answer with my wonderful panel. Now, before we go on any further, we must give our audience a bit of an opportunity to get to know who you are and where you've come from. So why don't we start with Elizabeth? Why don't you tell us a bit about where you've come from today?
Thanks for having us. So I'm the founder and CEO of AZA Finance. Our first brand name was Pathe, for anybody who knows. We were the first crypto exchange in Africa in 2013 and the first globally to trade crypto against mobile money. Since then, we've grown the business across the continent, up into the UK and Europe, where we're licensed on 2 continents. And essentially what we do is we provide on and off ramps for foreign exchange and crypto between Africa and the rest of the world. And happy to be here, almost a nine-year veteran of the space, building the infrastructure necessary to bring people into the Metaverse.
Brilliant. Well, we're off to a banging start. Tobias, why don't you keep the ball rolling? Where have you come from today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Toby, and we run Blockchain Founders Fund. We are an early-stage venture capital fund focusing on anything related to Web3. Anything's maybe a bit of a stretch, but quite a few. We've been around for 4 years now in the space as a fund. We've invested in, I think, over 150 companies across all major continents. And we do look at the Metaverse definitely quite closely. And what I just told her about, we're an equity-focused fund, which I think is something to clarify. So we don't necessarily always invest in the token of projects, but we still look at it very much like a Web2 angle in the sense that we invest on the equity of those companies, and then we follow up to $5 million in, once they grow and once they obviously show metrics that succeed.
Fantastic. And then on to Caroline.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. So I'm Caroline Hughes, co-founder and CEO of Lifetise, and we're building the world's first fintech metaverse. So we're using the concept of the metaverse for people to be able to actually simulate their own lives. So you can design your life in our virtual platform, and then we show you how to afford it in real life using a mix of TradFi, DeFi, and NFTs.
Fantastic. And last but not least, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Yavin, the founder and managing partner at Cointelligence Fund. We are a crypto VC fund completely focused on the metaverse and more specifically blockchain-based games. We are actually investing only in tokens. If we get equity, it's on top of the tokens as a bonus for us. But the whole strategy is around tokens. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a serial entrepreneur, started my first company before I turned 20, since then started and developed different companies in different industries. 17 years ago, started investing in startups as an angel investor, mentored and advised hundreds of different startups, and a little bit more than 5 years ago, started Cointelligence as a research company, the same research that we decided to base Cointelligence Fund on, and happy to be here. Thank you for listening to us.
Fantastic. Well, we've got great variation on the panel today. And yeah, we're going to be tackling the big wide world of the metaverse. So why don't we start with a very quick definition, a very clear definition. Why don't you tell us, what do you perceive the metaverse to be?
Sure. So as someone that's been living in the metaverse for the last about 15 years already on almost a daily basis, I would say that the definition is if there is an avatar and you completely control that avatar and let that avatar represent you, and it doesn't matter right now if it's a game, because you would be surprised, there are metaverse games out there with huge social aspects in them. And as long as you have that avatar, and as long as that avatar can grow, change according to your actions and according to what you would like to happen, that's a metaverse to me. It's not Ready Player One immersive experience only. That's the next stage of the metaverse. We're definitely not there yet. And in my opinion, it's definitely not the only situation where you can say it's a metaverse.
Fantastic. Well, that was a very, very good definition. Is there anybody who can add a little bit to that? Maybe Tobias, what would you perceive the metaverse to be?
I think for me it's very important to understand what the metaverse not is, right? In a sense that, you know, we've seen all these even conferences online and stuff like this where you essentially just create your own avatar and you walk around, and that's for me not a metaverse, right? Because there's a very important aspect of building an economy within that metaverse and enable you to take ownership, control, as you said, but also being incentivized for certain actions you're doing within that metaverse, right? It's not a virtual world. It's not another game. It's a more complex structure in a sense of actually like creating a space where you control your actions, you control your assets, we're able to engage with people, and it's not just you're not just creating an avatar in a playable version of the reality, but it goes much further down into how to create structures, incentive structures across these different sort of layers of the metaverse, which then eventually builds the whole metaverse and as itself.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Elizabeth, do you agree with those two definitions?
Well, you know, it's a spectrum, I believe. So I think, you know, we have different steps towards it. I have my feet firmly planted in the universe, and I facilitate tools and financial instruments that my customers will then use in the metaverse. And my children spend way too much time in the metaverse, I think, personally, and they're only 10 and 11. And so that's already indicative. You know, their parents are not interested in the metaverse. They are almost desperate to spend 100% of their time in the metaverse. So what does that tell you in 10 years where most of the youth population will be? And I think it's very important when we talk about banking and then digital banking. A lot of times the digital banking is a very sad version of regular banking with maybe just a really poor website, right? When we talked about mobile banking for a long time, it was regular brick and mortar banking loosely attached to the phone. Now, I lived and started the company in Kenya where mobile banking was a lifestyle. Everything revolved around the use of mobile money. And it was a much more immersive experience of what that looks like. So I think we can touch the metaverse in many different ways, but I think what the gentlemen here are saying is that it's time, there will be their own rules to society that may or may not reflect what you're used to. There's going to be different types of incentives which you may or may not be used to, just like nobody thought people would sleep on people's couches for Airbnb. I was the last person who was born in 1982 who thought that was super gross, and now I'm doing it all the time, you know? So I think, you know, we have to think about our mindset change, about what that looks like. Also for me, I've spent the last decade building a company servicing clients that work in, on, and across sub-Saharan Africa. So how will different parts of the planet enter the metaverse? I think access is something really interesting. And I think when we talk about the youth population, look at Nigeria, which is going to grow by, 50 million people in the next decade, and the UK will grow by 2 million people. And 40% of the global population will be African at the turn of the next century. So if we think about what that looks like, you could start to think about what the metaverse of the future looks like. It's going to be mapped against the youth population and the demographics. And so, what On is playing right now in the metaverse or experiencing right now is very central to his own existence. But when we start to think about other demographics and other age brackets and other experiences, their rules will be different. So I think we need to stay flexible and open because this is a society where it will be very easy to create new rules. Think about how many tokens exist. Think about how many, when I started in crypto, there was very few companies in the space. Think about how many have spawned in the last decade because the barrier to entry is so low. So if the barrier to entry is low and there is more access to many more people, just think about the possibilities of what those rules will look like.
Mm. Well, that's really, really fantastic, and you've touched on really interesting points there. Of course, we're going to be delving a little bit more into trading and online trading within the metaverse just a little bit shortly, but I'd really like to develop on what you said, Elizabeth, about the changing sort of user base of the metaverse. If we go to you, Caroline, what can you tell us about how the audience for the metaverse has changed as the technology for it has progressed?
Well, what's interesting, I think, is I've been talking about effectively building a metaverse type platform for the last 5 years, but I've been in the fintech space. And so people have looked at me like I'm absolutely mad. And I've had to dial it down, and I've had to explain it in ways that they might understand, saying things like, it's The Sims, but for your real life. You get to play out different life scenarios, just like you might have tried in The Sims. Then we run the financial models underneath. You get to make mistakes, but it doesn't impact you in real life. And they're like, I kind of get it, but I don't understand why anyone would use it. And so what's been interesting is so we've already seen that generational divide, because when I take that to older people, they're like, nah, no. No one's ever going to buy financial products through this platform. No one's ever going to use it. And yet, we were part of Accenture's FinTech Accelerator in 2019, and we kind of did a roadshow of a lot of different banks and other financial institutions. And we became like the millennial Pied Pipers, because we would describe what we were building, and we would just have this snaking queue of people kind of, and now obviously millennials are a bit older, but people kind of in their early 30s coming up to us saying, is it going to show me how I can actually afford to buy a house? Is it going to show me when I can actually afford to have children? Can it do this? Can it do that? And we were like, yeah, that's the point of it. And so for that generation, they were like, oh, this is genuinely useful. I can genuinely see how it's going to help my life. And then, of course, when we look at metaverse and what we all kind of instinctively understand it in terms of the games, in terms of games world, or the massive multiplayer online games that we already have, everyone who has kids, your kids are already in the metaverse. They've been in the metaverse for years. And what's been fascinating to me as I've kind of done more of these talks about kind of the crypto side of the metaverse and regulation and where it all fits in is we're very used to having these huge economies within these platforms like Fortnite, like Roblox. And there isn't any kind of moral panic about how much money children are spending in the metaverse and what that means. But all of a sudden, once we turn it into a token-based economy and the ability to trade that, it seems to flip people's mentality. And all of a sudden, they start to panic about what does that mean in terms of, is it exploitative? Is it Ponzinomics? All of these things. But nobody's asking those questions of whether everyone's spending way, way, way too much money on Robux, you know?
Well, what about you, Tobias? Do you think that the audience is becoming younger and younger for the metaverse? How would you see it from your industry standpoint?
So I wouldn't necessarily say it's becoming younger and younger. I mean, in a sense that, yes, I would say children obviously have exposure earlier on into those technologies, right? Because you have a phone pretty young. I don't know if you guys have kids, but like from a lot of what I hear is like they get a phone when they're like 5 years old, 6 years old. I start playing around with 7 years old. They know exactly how to use an iPad, all these things. So yes, they understand the opportunities way earlier. Like when, even as I'm not the oldest, but like I had a phone when I was like 12 and it was like a Sony Ericsson or something like this, which couldn't do anything, right? So obviously it's a very different landscape now in terms of that you get exposure. But I do think there are still a lot of people who are also wrapping their head around it from a more institutional perspective, who are not necessarily like 13, right? They might be getting inspired by their kids who already understand it, and then like they bring it up from a more like maybe even unconsciously towards what they're building, what they're working on. But I think it cannot only be driven by the youngsters, right? I think if we really want to bring this to mass adoption, like everybody should at least look at it, should consider it, should understand it, what that means, how is it useful, how can it be beneficial for your company. And I think also it's very important to mention that it's maybe not important for every single industry or every single person, every single business model out there, maybe as of now, right? I think you cannot force something in the metaverse if it's not necessarily right now the right time or the right use case, right? I think a big part is also of like evaluating what are the pros and cons of using it, because it comes with additional layer of complexity, right? It comes with a learning curve for the organization, probably, depending on how large and small it is. It depends with it comes with a regulatory aspect, especially if you use like any sort of underlying crypto piece. And of course, it brings in a whole different dynamic. And I think, to be honest, even as of now, when Dubai government announced that they're going to hire 40,000 people in a metaverse, like all these things are great, but it just touches the surface, right? There's not actual like deep down convincement yet that we need to go and do something in the metaverse. It's more like, how can we look innovative and obviously try it and like get an idea from it, and then essentially like figure out what that means moving forward. So I think sort of wrapping that to your question is like, yes, I do think it's driven by young people in the sense that they get early exposure, but I do also think that now with the industry growing so big and so present, and also social media and like TikTok and Instagram, all these things, I think that a lot of people now look at the metaverse and figure out like, hey, is that useful? Can it be useful? So the push needs to come like genuine from the bigger part of the population, because there's a big delay, right? If every 5-year-old is going to watch the metaverse now, until they actionably do something, it's going to be like 15 years from now, right? So like, but they can be influencing, inspiring people maybe at an older age, because they are the future essentially, right? I mean, they're going to use this in 20, 30, 50 years from now when we're not going to be around anymore. So as early they get educated, understand the risks and benefit from it, I think it's a very positive thing. Right?
Yes, I completely agree with you, and I think you've all made very good points to sort of really outline what the demographics of this look like. If we turn our attention more towards the use cases and specifically online trading, maybe you can start us off. What does an online trade in the metaverse look like? And more specifically, what kind of assets might be involved in that process?
Sure. So first of all, the current or old school metaverse, I'm referring to the games that's been in existence for a while, as mentioned, Fortnite, Roblox, and so on. So you already have whole economies inside these games. You have, for example, the biggest economy, I would say right now, is there's a competition between Roblox and World of Warcraft. And with Roblox, it's very, very easy because you have a lot of trading that's being done in the platform itself. Between the kids, they are actually trading different items in the platform itself. In World of Warcraft, you have the auction house. You actually have the in-game gold that you can use to buy items on the auction house, similar to a real-life auction house. And obviously, you can do the trading between the gamers, the players themselves. But if we take it to the next level, and what's been seen in the blockchain and crypto industry in the last few years is everything around mainly two things. One is NFTs. Everything around the NFTs, if it's the metaverse land, if it's the different items that you have in the metaverse itself, and everything has a representation of NFTs. And that's a part of the reason that we're so excited about this, because it's the first time that you can actually have the connection between the metaverse and the physical world, at least the economics part of it. And it's something that we couldn't see that ever happened before. The second part is obviously the different tokens that's been mentioned here already. You have so many different tokens. You have different metaverses that are being built based on different tokens, sometimes one token, sometimes more than one token. And that completely opens up our world or our virtual reality to something that we couldn't even dream about before. And it's so huge because everything can be represented by a token. By the way, don't get me wrong, when I say cryptocurrencies and tokens, obviously it includes NFTs, but there is some kind of separation, at least in the eyes of the crypto community people, even though it's tokens. Going back to what I was saying, to wrap it up and to finalize my answer, I think that what we've seen until now with the different NFTs and different cryptocurrencies related to the metaverse, to be honest, is nothing compared to what's coming. Everything was some kind of a trial and error. You hear and you read in the headline news all the time that people bought this land for tens of millions. Now it's worth 1 penny. People that bought different NFTs like the apes or the punks or whatever, not worth too much right now. But again, I don't get too excited about it because it's one of the biggest, if not the biggest revolution that mankind ever had. And I'm talking about blockchain and cryptocurrencies. This is just the beginning. It's nothing compared to what's coming. And there's going to be, in my opinion, huge markets. With regards to trading, there's going to be so many different opportunities to trade the different assets that are being built right now. But having said all of that, and putting aside my excitement, right now there's not much trading done. Let me be clear about that. We've had the big, huge crash that happened in the both traditional and crypto markets, and obviously it's influencing a lot. Right now, the trading volume is very close to zero, the way that we see it, but definitely not what's coming.
Well, wonderful. Caroline, what
Can
would
I
you
just
have
jump
to-
in? Because
Of course.
I've got quite a lot of stats on
Go
this.
on.
I've suddenly become like Metaverse trading stats woman over the last few weeks. I've been giving a lot of talks on this. And perhaps it will give some color. So if we take a look at the tokens themselves and the market capitalization and of the biggest metaverses that we have. So if we take a look at, say, Decentraland, so even a couple of months ago, that was their market cap was at about sort of 1.1 billion. I looked today and it's at about 700 million, right? So it has gone down significantly. If we look at the land sales, which is really where a lot of the kind of token sales were, the NFT sales happened last year. The biggest one was the other side, which is the Bored Ape Yacht Club metaverse. Now, if you remember, this was in April of this year, and they sold land worth $561 million within a 24-hour period. And so you could see that there was a huge amount of trading happening. And in total, since the beginning of kind of last year, there's been nearly 2 billion, so about 1.9 billion invested in virtual real estate. And I think one thing that we didn't talk about when we gave the definition of the metaverse is the fact that we don't have a single metaverse. We have, as On said, a multiverse. So there are over 170 plus more being released every day, different metaverse projects at various stages of development. Now, so far, most of the investment has kind of gone into 4 or 5 big ones, you know, and understandably, you know, people tend to follow the trends. But if we've seen kind of 2 billion in just real estate transactions, but then when we look at the secondary market, because of course, one of the reasons for investing in things like NFTs is that there's supposed to be a very liquid secondary market in the way that there wouldn't be for real estate or equities until you get into the public markets. And in terms of the trading volume, we've gone down from kind of the peak in, say, like November, December last year, where you had kind of trading volumes around 65 million in November last year for real estate. And we're down to something like 65,000. So it's gone down by 99%. And in terms of the value of the real estate that people bought, it's down from January this year until now, 85%. In terms of what it's worth, which, as you say, On, completely tracks the overall crypto market, and it tracks a lot of the tech stocks that were really popular last year. So I think there was obviously a huge amount of speculation in land. It was the first thing you could really do in the metaverse, right? You could either buy the metaverse token or you could buy the land, and people got very, very excited. But I think the next wave is going to be, but what's being built in the metaverse? What's giving people the reason to spend time and do things in the metaverse that then drives that token price, drives the value of that economy?
Fantastic. Well, it's really fascinating, all of the insights that you've been able to provide here. In terms of, Elizabeth, I just want to turn to you because you mentioned that you work in Africa and building that sort of digital economy in Africa. Do you see any sort of differences or similarities in how trades in the metaverse are different in Africa?
No, because humans are the same everywhere. I think it's just access, right? So, you know, a lot of our customers, when they first came on, there weren't a lot of exchanges that would accept African KYC. and I say African even though it's 55 countries, there are very few places in the world that would accept KYC outside of the US, Western Europe, and even China got turned off in the early days of crypto. So when we talk about crypto, we have to remember that most exchanges were very quickly limited to accepting the driver's licenses of residents of just that country. And everybody talks about the lack of crypto regulation, but there's a lot of exchanges where you couldn't buy or sell, couldn't even get in and out of crypto because of that. So one of the things that we set out to do was to make sure our users could access African currencies for everything, for business payments, for treasury payments, for remittances. We are one of the largest remittance processors on the African continent who trade in regular TradFi fiat. And we just see cryptocurrencies as part of a basket of currencies. And we think that given the demographics of the continent, we believe that the currency basket will have to include local African currencies, cryptocurrencies, stablecoins, et cetera. So, it was really about access. And now we see finally, 9 years later, a couple of exchanges that are gaining volume. And for a long time, there were a lot of people searching online, blockchain, Bitcoin, crypto, from the African continent. And there was a lot of news all over in the cryptoverse that, oh, wow, there's all these users searching for it, but they didn't have access. No one would accept them as users. So we were servicing the larger customers. We're a wholesale exchange, an OTC desk. And then a lot of our smaller retail exchange customers started to grow. And now their volumes are getting significant. And it's exciting because now consumers can finally access it. So we can have 170 metaverses or whatever there is, but if the only way to get in is to buy a token that's offered only on an exchange that accepts a U.S. driver's license, who cares, right? Because your metaverse is going to be filled with people from New Jersey. So I think, we have to really think about this wild, imaginative world with this bottleneck. So how do we welcome people into these new experiences? And that's something that we're really excited to be doing, and we're working with a couple of great companies in this space that do that. And we have to remember that there's influence in music, in art from all over the world. Afrobeats has taken over American and European music in a lot of ways. And Senegalese fashion, I was just living in Dakar for a few years, is all over Galerie Lafayette in Paris, right? But those creators are not being don't have any monetization opportunities. And a lot of their art is monetized elsewhere. So I think what's really exciting about this space is that it's, again, lowering the barrier to entry. It's cheaper for a startup to become a startup. It's cheaper for a startup to gain attention, to share their product, to have users globally, and then, of course, to welcome content creators without that gatekeeper. And, I raised money from Silicon Valley back in the olden days when you had to actually go there and meet everybody on Sand Hill Road. And now, a Nigerian startup can do a token issue and, have users all over the world. And that's in just 10 years. So it's pretty exciting about access. And I think we still have a major access problem right now. And, that's gotten marginally better. But again, across 55 countries, there's less than a dozen exchanges.
Well, let's bring it back out and just look at a few of those bottlenecks that you were mentioning in your answer. Tobias, I was wondering if you'd like to continue the conversation on the use of legacy systems and specifically legacy trading systems. Do you think that what we have now is applicable to the metaverse, or do you think that it's going to need to change, and how so?
I definitely do think there's a big need for change, right? In a sense that all of these systems have been around for a very, very long time, and now someone is coming up with something way more innovative, in a sense that, how do we bring those two together, or do we get rid of either one of them and replace it with something equally as new, which will make it way faster, better, and less friction? Now, if the second is the case, then obviously that depends on a lot of different stakeholders, because what right now is there works to a big extent. Right? It might not be the best solution, it might not be the fastest, but it definitely works. Now, if you look at the metaverse side of things, and maybe that's just, you mentioned 130 or something. I checked yesterday in our database, we saw over 1,000 metaverses which came to us for funding over the last 2.5 years, right? And obviously these metaverses had various different ideas. A metaverse for hiking, a metaverse for online medication, metaverse for real estate, for trading, right? For all sorts of different ideas. But we take a very long-term approach, right? I mean, I mentioned at the very beginning that there's a big difference between investing in equity and investing in token. And that brings you then back to your question. So we look at it from a business perspective. We have an 8-year fund, right? So if we invest in this company now, is this company going to be around in 8 years from now? And the challenge we've seen right now is a lot of these companies I'm giving huge kudos to, right? Sandbox, Decentraland, they've done something very innovative and they tried it out and it worked to an extent. But now obviously we've seen it all coming down to a very, very big extent because we realized that is not there yet, right? I mean, the hardware piece is missing. These metaverses are not as immersive right now. There's still a lot of friction. There were not many controls in place. There's a big barrier of entry, as we just heard. And of course, everybody wants to then collaborate with the big names in the space. Should it be a bank? Should it be a payment gateway? And then they are sitting there like, how do I integrate this, right? How do I educate people? How do I bring that together? So now, that's why we decided not to invest in a lot of these metaverses was exactly for that reason. Because I think the next wave of metaverses which are going to come up address all these challenges, or hopefully address all these challenges, which they've seen what these other sort of innovators and pioneers have been trying to do, and figure out how can we improve that and sort of solve for all these gaps. And I think that's where it's going to be very interesting from now on moving forward, is because we had so much learning from all these different experiences, and we had so many conversations around the metaverse, the technology in itself, but also from an adoption perspective, that it's going to be way easier now to just figure out what do we need to do on both sides, right? Because I'm a big believer that innovation in itself is not going to be only driven by startups, right? I mean, it will be a big part of it, but if the big organizations, if not anyone from a retail perspective, if even NGOs are not sort of thinking in the same way, then you will always have friction, and that will sort of delay the process. But I think what's really interesting to see, and maybe you guys know that from your organizations as well, that it becomes a topic of discussion, right? And I think that's already a really, really interesting point, that we don't look at the other way and be like, oh, it's going to go away, it's not going to be meaningful anyway. And we just figure out, like, what does that mean? We all go to conferences, or we do a small little part in order to understand what do we need to do in order to integrate this. But I think from a trading perspective especially, we need to look away from like that being a game, right? We need to look at a way and bring more seriousness in the space. Like, how can we just essentially improve experiences? I think you mentioned at the very beginning that online banking was basically a more boring version of banking and these kind of things. But like, if you now can walk into a virtual store and like you feel immersed and you have a virtual customer service and you're incentivized to go there and like it's just a way better experience, and that's going to help every single financial institution out there as well, right? You're going to make things a lot easier. There's less friction. And now I think the big part, what is now moving forward, which I'm very excited about, is investing in these infrastructure tools which are able to connect sort of the older, more legendary systems with the more innovative tech. And I'm a big believer that potentially there has to be a significant improvement on the institutional side in order to make that work, right? Because we cannot always live on bridging solutions. There has to be an integration, full integration. There has to be a lead. There has to be a general consensus from the public and obviously from the leadership team. But I think right now it's a really interesting time looking at this, because a lot of this dust, things which hasn't been working, are eradicated now and should be eradicated now. And now it's the next step of like building on these learning processes we had.
Yeah, and just on this, I mean, we have to remember that R&D is now outsourced. So everybody in the financial sector who still thinks that R&D is going to come internally needs to have a reset. Because I think, when I was a banking associate at Goldman Sachs and Credit Suisse, everything was in the institution, 70,000 employees. That planet is gone. And I think, when you have 1,000 different metaverses, yes, not all of those are going to be anchors, but some of them are going to have great ideas that are then implemented. Just as like not everybody's going to be a major fashion house, but you can have a small little drop or collection on the side, which then influences in a massive way other places. So I think we never really figured out with the fintech version 1, 2, or 3 how small fintechs are integrated with larger financial institutions. We never really had full acceptance into that. We never really saw a lot of the really great ideas be accepted by mainstream financial institutions. We just saw some anchor fintechs grow, and they were doing that. And I think it's an opportunity wasted if we don't, again, open our minds to what the future is going to look like, and take ideas even from, wacky fringe metaverses or whatever, because a lot of them have an amazing user experience ideas. And this is where the frontier is for experimentation. This is where the best graduates are going. They're most excited by this because they played these games in high school and university. And I think that's where everybody's going. Nobody with, an exciting brain who has a lot of good ideas is going into that traditional banking analyst role. Sorry to say. So I think, we need to think again about where the good ideas are coming from, where the talent is, where the excitement is, and it's not necessarily connected to where the funding is.
Tyler, I'd like to add to what my fellow panelists just said. In my opinion, the most important part, actually, beside what Elizabeth mentioned about the KYC part, which is so horribly correct, unfortunately, regulation is going to be so important for the next few years, because what's been mentioned regarding the tokens, right now the SEC, the American regulator, is trying to regulate all tokens as securities, which is absolutely horrible, which is exactly the opposite of what Elizabeth mentioned before about the entry barrier, which is going to completely destroy it. And by the way, that's a part of the reason that I got so excited about the blockchain and crypto industry 5 years ago, when unfortunately too many or most of them were scams, but that's happening with every huge innovation. And I've been there when the internet revolution happened, when the mobile revolution happened, and we've had the same amount of scams, if not more. But again, the blockchain and crypto industry is too young, so it might suppress everything. But even though most of it was scam, or as I used to call it, either scams projects or, excuse my language, bullshit projects that had nothing behind them. And I've seen too many metaverses that are doing this and that, and it's completely bollocks, in my opinion. But we have to make sure that the regulators actually understand blockchain and cryptocurrencies. They're not even there yet. Asking them to understand and to regulate everything around or inside the metaverse is definitely not going to happen anytime soon. And the first thing that they all have to do, in my opinion, is hire a few degens just to understand what's the content and what's being said. Because right now, most of them don't even have a clue on what's being discussed
That's
among...
That's not going to happen.
Of course, it's not going to happen, but it's something that I say just to get people to think about it, because they do have to consult with the degens in order to regulate the future of the metaverse. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. And going back to the question about the audience that you asked before, absolutely, it's being ruled right now by the teenagers. It's going to be much more than that. And yes, everybody else will follow at some point, but the metaverse is going to be ruled by the teenagers' notion. It's already happening now. It's going to grow much, much more. And I think that the regulators have to take that into consideration. And lastly, I think that, and just to make things clear, I think that regulation is great. I'm saying that as a part of the fact that I'm also a lawyer. Sorry to share with you that. And I don't think that regulation is bad. I think it's very, very important, but it has to be done in the right way. You cannot regulate new financial instruments according to the same regulation that you had 100 years ago. It just doesn't work. You have to make changes, and that's what I have been talking about for the last 5 years already.
There are a lot of pieces that need to come together, as you've all painted a picture of so well. I'm wondering, in terms of, obviously we've talked a lot about the benefits and the barriers that we need to overcome, but Caroline, what can you tell us about the pitfalls of trading in the metaverse, if there are any?
That feels like a really loaded question, given the turbulence and the wild things that we've been seeing over the past. And it wasn't specifically metaverse related, but from a retail investor perspective, the FTX saga. I think so. What are the pitfalls? I think we've kind of already identified them. Is the fact that we've got the first wave of metaverses, right? We've got the first wave that's out there. We had a lot of people speculate on those assets, and just at the height of the bull market. And then obviously as that turns into a bear market, everybody suddenly goes, oh no, that's terrible, right? And we still, as we've said, don't have enough actual use cases of things for people to be doing within the metaverses. The newer ones, right? The Decentralands and the sandboxes, the ones that have been built as sort of an open metaverse where you can kind of build whatever you want, do whatever you want, but not enough people have built for people to do. So the pitfalls really are, A, there isn't enough liquidity. So everything is kind of in a slight sort of tundra, slightly frozen over state at the moment. So we're not actually really seeing a lot of innovation. We're not seeing a lot of investment. When I think of, the excitement that was around things like Every Realm, the investment in Every Realm, and they were kind of lauded as the metaverse real estate developer. To create all of these destination places, fantasy islands. If anybody remembers the super mega yacht, the Metaflower, that has this giant super yacht in the sandbox. And it basically has, I think, 2 helipads, a jacuzzi, a dance floor. And in November last year, it sold for $650,000, right? But why and for what, and what is it going to be used for? And so I guess if I'm kind of just saying the pitfalls, we haven't yet proven out what the use cases are. So those who are kind of speculating from a retail perspective, I think have gone in hoping that the overall value will increase as more is done and more is built. But actually what I'm most excited about almost is the stuff that is happening on, not inside those metaverses, but people who are working on sort of related projects to create an open metaverse, to be able to ensure the interoperability between metaverses, to be able to provide the payment rails, just like Elizabeth is doing, the on and the off ramps, and effectively the value exchange of currencies within the metaverse project so that we can actually build for mass adoption. Because right now, I think that's the kind of, there's a few like dirty little secrets, one of which is there's nobody really in the metaverse. I don't know if anyone saw, Decentraland had to come out with its figures because DApp Radar was saying they've only got sort of 800 people a day in Decentraland, and Decentraland came back and said, no, actually it's a lot more. It's around 56,000 monthly average users. Now, that's not a lot of people using this new technology on a regular basis in terms of kind of the volumes of people trading within it. So I think I saw maybe there's about 6,000 or 7,000 wearables bought in Decentraland per month, and about 1,700 emotes, which is like the gestures, you can like get your avatar to dance. And so some of these blockchain projects haven't yet got the user adoption or the use cases. But what's interesting is when you look at the online games, they do. So what is it that we can actually learn from those and bring that type of marketplace, that type of experience, those type of feedback loops into the blockchain metaverses? And I think that's when things will open up.
Fascinating. Well, this whole conversation has been really, really interesting, and we could talk all day about it, I'm sure. But just to round off the session in a really nice way, we're just going to sort of try and answer the overarching question, which is online trading keeping up with the metaverse? Who knows? So let's go around one by one and say yes or no and why you've given that answer. So Elizabeth, let's start with you.
Like I said before, in the last 9 years, no one was mentioning the metaverse, even pretty much 2 years ago, to be honest. No offense to you early adopters. But I mean, the fact that all of this has happened in 24 months is phenomenal. And, 9 years ago, I'd go to a regulator and talk about crypto, and they were like, what spaceship did you just step off of? And now, my mom is invested. So I think, the pace of innovation and the pace of adoption, and again, look at the graduates, the jobs and the occupation with the youth graduates that are getting out of there, where all the engineering talent's going. It's phenomenal when you look at it that way. Where is the engine and the resources heading? And it's into this space. And so I definitely think online trading has just begun. Momentum is big. I've survived 5 bear markets, 3 crypto, 2 TradFi, I guess. So I mean, I'm not worried.
Tobias, do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, definitely agree for the most part. I do think institutional adoption is still extremely slow. Right? I mean, I don't think it actually matters that Visa bought a NFT, because they're not doing it because it helps. They're just doing it because for good press. I think. So I think we need to have a deeper conviction from companies to actually think about it, explore it, and not just like do it for the sake of doing it. And I do think a big issue is also risk management in the space, right? I mean, a lot of these things like FTX is obviously not very helpful, and it's just getting again a lot these thoughts into the space and like, oh, I told you, like these kind of things. So I do think we need to see the founders of the space, like all you guys, essentially, striving for the good part, like being, thinking of how you handle customer funds, of how you think about the whole space, and then only the projects who are acting accordingly should also get supported and get funded. Not only 5 projects, like we should look at it from a more sort of holistic platform. And then I think it's a whole thing about education, that we need early adopters like you guys who go out and say, hey, this is how it works, this is how we do it. And even if it's just a small talk here and there, I think overall, again, the consistency matters.
Caroline, what do you think?
I guess I look at it as like the evolution. So when I think that, Second Life, that had such an enormous economy, sort of it's 15 years and I still like meet people who are like, oh yeah, it's still like Second Life. So, and then we've obviously had, all of these massive online games that we didn't call metaverses before a couple of years ago, but we did recognize, and we didn't really think of it as trading, what was happening. I think, think about everyone who plays Candy Crush and willingly will pay a bit of money so that they don't die and they can actually get more lives and do things. So now that we've just got it as token economies, we're only really just starting to scratch the surface of what it means to trade. But as On said, the ability to take all of the different assets within it and then give them a monetizable value that can then be traded outside of that metaverse opens everything up. And I think we're really, really just at the beginning of understanding what that is.
I love that. On, let's finish this off. What do you think? Is it keeping up?
I completely agree with what you said now. I think that it's only the beginning. We're definitely not there yet, but you have to remember that with cryptocurrencies, everything explodes so fast, and it's been talked as if it's been around for such a long time. It's only the beginning. It's not there yet, but the future is absolutely bright, in my opinion.
Well, we'll leave you on that. The future is bright. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining me and my panelists on this discussion about the metaverse. And enjoy the rest of the event.